About a year ago, I uploaded a History of the Emblem video on Genealogy of the Holy War. People liked it, it brought in a lot of views too, but there was just one small problem. The video sucked. I left out a whole lot of crucial information, it was short, the audio quality wasn't that great. It's probably my least favorite out of all of the videos I've made. So I unlisted it. Why? Because Yggdrasil, one of the series' best continents, deserves better representation. This is a huge game for the Fire Emblem franchise, and my measly 5 minutes of mediocre content really didn't do it justice. So we're tackling it again. Welcome to History of the Emblem, Genealogy of the Holy War. Take 2. Let's imagine once more. It's the mid-90s and you're Chocojax. You've created probably the most popular and well-made strategy RPG series of all time. But you just don't quite know that yet. At this point in time, this strategy RPG series only has 3 games, and they all take place in the same world.
My hope is for people of all worlds to live happily.
It's definitely time for something new.
Here I come!
Wanting to broaden his horizons a bit, Chocojax ditched the familiar setting of Arcanea and decided to create a new world that would have nothing to do with the previously mentioned continent. This time, Kaga created Yggdrasil, a continent that would borrow heavily from Norse mythology. Have you ever wondered why Yggdrasil's lore is so deep and defined? Well, it's because Kaga really loved Yggdrasil. His want for a large-scale epic tale really caused him and his team to take some time and develop the continent to the best of their ability. The main theme of Yggdrasil, according to Chocojax, is that the stupidity of humans can possibly forge history forever. Kaga intended for the Yggdrasil saga to be presented as history in the making. Speaking of Genealogy's close ties with history, Kaga wanted to make the story as historically accurate as possible. This is why Genealogy of the Holy War has so many references to incest and death, since those are things that really happened within the medieval age.
Deirdre! Julia!
At this point in development, Kaga and his team had made so much new content that they weren't even sure that they should call the game Fire Emblem anymore. On the gameplay side of things, Kaga was really pushing for the RPG elements from Gaiden to make a return, but the rest of the team felt as if this wasn't something that they should handle. In the end, the development team won this battle, and the game was again given the name Fire Emblem. Names like Sword Emblem and Holy Sword Emblem Kaiser were considered. But gameplay was really the last thing on the mind of Chocojax when creating Genealogy of the Holy War. In fact, Kaga would later even express regret for not paying enough attention to the gameplay during development. But honestly, it's kind of admirable. As weird as that may sound, the dude was really into his story. In fact, he was so into it that he wrote way too much to fit into the game. There were originally going to be 3 acts in Genealogy instead of 2. The third act would be a telling of what happened in between the generation gap. Ideas for this third act would later be edited, condensed, and become what we now know as Thracia 776.
This is my fight!
Genealogy of the Holy War, under the name FireEmblemHeroes of Light, would be scheduled to release in March of 1996. However, for reasons that have unfortunately faded to history, the game was pushed back to May of that year and released under the name we all know today. Speaking of Genealogy's beta title, there's quite a bit of mystery regarding this early build of the game. The following information is simply a rumor and may or may not be true. I thought it would be interesting to include in the video because it's nice to be aware of events that have happened in the history of Fire Emblem and its fanbase. Let's begin the story, shall we? In July of 2008, admin of the website Fire Emblem Universe was offered notes about 3 Fire Emblem prototypes from an online contact. These games were Binding Blade, Thracia 776, and Genealogy of the Holy War. The contact claimed that these prototypes came from someone whose father worked at Intelligent Systems, but no official screenshots or gameplay were included with the PDF document. All the admin received were notes that were written in broken English, which were deciphered by the authors of Serenesforest sometime later. This is what the authors made of these notes. Like Seliph, Sigurd would start the game off as a junior lord. Leaf, Ethlin, and Lachesis would all be considered Lord characters and warrant a game over if any of them got killed. Hilda had access to use Volflame in the final chapter, which would have given her Fjalar Major Blood, which is actually what she should have instead of Dane Blood. There's no known reason why it was switched to be incorrect in the final game. Deirdre would have been Byron's daughter, which actually makes Sigurd and Deirdre an incestuous relationship. But knowing how Kaga wanted to write his story, it doesn't sound too out of the ordinary. Lachesis was also the planned mother of Ares in this build. The name Loptis, which refers to both the spooky dragon boy and the tome, was originally named Loki in this build, which is a name that you might recognize if you play Fire Emblem Heroes. 3 dark spells in the final build of Genealogy of the Holy War are named after Loki's children from mythology, which may give this rumor a little more weight. But then again, we can't know for sure. So, why is Genealogy of the Holy War so important to the Fire Emblem series? That's a question I really haven't quite answered on this channel, and it's an important question to answer. People will usually throw around the whole genealogy is best and it doesn't get better than FE4 statements all the time, but they never really say why. Well, for the Fire Emblem series specifically, Genealogy of the Holy War introduced a lot of series staples.
Let's go.
A Fire Emblem game wouldn't be complete without the good old weapon triangle. Every Fire Emblem fan knows this. Lances beat swords, swords beat axes, and axes beat lances.
You'll regret this!
That mechanic has become something that almost completely defines the way this series highlights strategy. Then there's the historical love and marriage system, which was funnily enough inspired by Kaga's love for race horses. Genealogy's marriage system took about a year's worth of work to be implemented, despite the constant objection of, well, anyone who wasn't Shozo Kaga, really. Fortunately, all of their hard work would not be in vain. The love system was extremely popular for Genealogy of the Holy War, and even made its way into the series' biggest games, Awakening and Fates, albeit in slightly different forms. Genealogy also introduced skills, the strength and magic stats, and a multitude of different archetypes that I presented in my Genealogy Fast Facts video. But that's all stuff I've said on this channel before. Besides introducing a bunch of series staples, what made Genealogy of the Holy War such an integral part of the Fire Emblem series? Well, Genealogy of the Holy War really did set an early, great example of what Fire Emblem's strengths and weaknesses are. In terms of strengths, Fire Emblem can afford to create worlds filled with deep lore and character development without sacrificing the weight of its permadeath mechanic. Fire Emblem can also successfully play to the state of the industry and incorporate things that attract people who aren't even necessarily familiar with the series. Let's bring back the love system for a moment. Wanting fictional characters to kiss in video games isn't just a recent thing. The concept of marriage in games was extremely popular in Japan in the mid-1990s. Intelligent Systems recognized this and put it in Genealogy, despite how hard it was. They knew they could draw an audience, and that's something that stuck with the Fire Emblem series for ages. In terms of weaknesses, Genealogy just goes to show that gameplay and story do need to have a good mix in Fire Emblem. The most popular evidence people use nowadays is the Fates Conquest situation, where the story is bad but the gameplay is amazing, but many people forget that even Kaga himself felt that Genealogy focused way too much on story and not enough on gameplay. Both of these pieces of evidence together further prove that Fire Emblem needs to have that happy medium, and while not an entirely positive sentiment, it's still a huge series-defining impact. It still confuses me that we haven't gotten a remake of Genealogy of the Holy War yet. I think that's something that's long past due. Can you imagine how amazing the game would look if the remake was done in the style of Fire Emblem Echoes? Since Intelligent Systems has already remade the first 3 games, I know everyone is crossing their fingers in hopes of Genealogy being next in line. A game that has had a huge impact on the franchise that many have come to love deserves to be accessible by everyone.